It's always good to see lots of folks, such as it is, but it is twice as many as last year, so that's good. You know, annual general meetings are always all kinds of excitement and fun, I'm sure. But this year we're going to rock through a couple of good things, change over the board, bunch of interesting financial information, and kind of where the industry's at in New Zealand. For the first time, we're streaming this to Google Hangouts, which is theoretically going to be recorded on YouTube for us, so anyone come back after the fact and have a look. So we'll just get started. So agenda for this evening's meeting, chairperson's report on the business of the society. That's me for another hour. The secretary's report on the finance of the society. That's Joe for another hour. And the statement of accounts, the election of the new committee, and any Q&A that we might want to do with the folks who are here. So we'll get right into the report. So just our numbers for the last 12 months, just grabbing a whole bunch of stuff. Last year's QB Game Starter, we had 30 prototypes and business plans submitted, and we're able to get a winner and a grand prize winner of that, who have since gone on and do some very cool things, Gravity and Goblins of Elderstone. Gravity has been accepted into the PAX Indie Showcase this year. Goblins of Elderstone went through a successful Kickstarter, is now on successfully greenlit, and is now in early access on Steam. We gave away 15 GDC All Access Passes for women and other represented groups. We got 6 GDC travel grants set up, Callahan Innovation, Dinosaur Polo Club, and the NZGDA itself provided those. We've got around 1,600 members, which is our MailChimp subscriber stats, so actual game development, game developers, student members, and other interested parties. Somewhere a little bit lower than that, but that's a lot of people, and they all get our newsletter every month, and lots of them open it. It's got a really great open rate, which is nice, given how much time it takes to put together. There's now 1,170 members as of the moment I checked this a couple of hours ago, but I think there's been a few more come in and since then. On the merged New Zealand Game Developers Association, International Game Developers Association New Zealand Facebook group. I'll get to what that's all about in a minute. We had over 500 attendees at NZGDC last year. This year, we're expecting similar numbers, if not more. We had 12 games shown at Armageddon in Christchurch and Wellington, the NZGDA booth. And we've completed our studio survey for the year, and the New Zealand game industry is within a whisker of $100 million revenue across the country. So we'll start with that. So every year since 2012, we've been fortunate to be able to do quite a deep survey with all of our studio members across New Zealand, and the growth has been quite remarkable. And in this last year, coming from 2016 to fiscal 2017, bumped it, as I say, just about that $100 million mark, 12% growth, 97% of that exports. So it's healthy. It's a good start. And that's with the unfortunate closure of Gameloft, of course, occurring, which was a significant dip in revenues and a significant dip in employment numbers, but we were able to stay strong and continue growing despite that. Fortunately, lots of those Gameloft folks are now working alongside other colleagues at other studios across New Zealand, and some of them have started some studios here. So not everyone has left who came to New Zealand for that, which we're very thankful for. As always, the digital business model is sort of the way that we do this stuff. The nice shift that's occurred, in the last 5 years is that most developers are working independently, so they're not beholden to publishers. They can self-publish their content on Steam, iOS, Android, and other places. Still lots of folks doing that mix of indie and contract stuff, so doing contract work to keep the lights on, pay the bills, and while they work on their own games on the side, with the eye towards moving into that 55% of fully independent developers. There's a good chunk still doing contract development, some still working in outsourcing, and a small group still doing tools development. So employment-wise numbers, 500, a nice even 500 popped up, and as Stephen was saying, it seems like $100 million and 500 employees. It's almost like we goosed the numbers a little bit, but we really didn't. It's why we made sure to put 99.9 on that first slide. And of all the employers we spoke to, all 29 studios, our expected hiring is about 93 jobs over the next year. Representation, gender representation in New Zealand is similar to the rest of the industry, 17% women in the industry. There's lots of discussions that we've been having, and I know like the Women in Games New Zealand group and many others are having about how we can try and increase that number. That's a long job, but it's one that's well worth doing. Just looking at where the studios are spread out, unsurprisingly, the bulk are in Auckland, and there's a good chunk in Wellington as well. Handful of smaller studios, well established out in different regions, and obviously Dunedin well represented by Rocketworks and Runaway, Cerebral Fix, Digital Confectioners, Stickman in Christchurch. We always ask the studios, what are the things that are holding you back? What's your biggest challenges? Obviously, skill shortages are the big limitation to growth. We're very fortunate in New Zealand. We have lots of schools graduating lots of excellent, new game developers, but they are junior. And of course, we can't absorb all that many juniors. We need to pair them up with seniors to help them grow into these roles. So unsurprisingly, we need programmers. But this is true all over the world. This is, and same goes for artists, game designers, management. Really, this, I think, this distribution of skill shortages really mirrors what you see in the rest of the world. I don't think you'd see much different in Canada or the US or anywhere in Europe, really. The barriers to growth that we ask people about, the highest sort of factor ones are expansion capital and early stage capital, right? Funding. Funding is forever the problem for any business, but particularly for game development, and particularly in New Zealand, where there's very little in the way of government support. So we were very happy to see New Zealand Film Commission start up the Interactive Development Fund this year, but by and large, compared to elsewhere, there is not much support. And investors in New Zealand are not particularly educated about the game sector. So they, again, it's one of those jobs that is a long-term commitment. Business skills are identified by a lot of folks. So we've got a lot of very passionate programmers and artists and game designers. The necessary skills to go along with that, of course, are business development, management, marketing. Those are all big challenges. And fortunately, those are the kinds of things that we can train up. Diversity. Most studios, I think, are trying to figure out how they diversify their workforce. And when you look at the in-demand roles, and then you look at who's available, that's naturally going to be a challenge. But it's something that's forefront of mind for a lot of studios. International contracts, publisher deals, the rate of change, those are all sort of falling on the lower end of things. And NZ's reputation is one we've got questions about before. And that was a question that is works. Seems to be working. Okay, but it's not sharing my screen anymore. That's easily fixed. There we go. Cool. So we moved NZGDA.com over to SiteGrounds. That lets us go in and do our own maintenance quite a bit easier. It's also significantly faster. It's hosted by SiteGrounds Data Center in Singapore, and that comes down to New Zealand very quickly, which is fortunate. There's still some maintenance to be done there. Of course, if you go to NZGDA.com right now, it works. You can get it all the content. It's nice and fast, but it doesn't look nearly as good as it used to, and that's been broken for some time. Just something that we're going to be looking at fixing as quickly as we can. We trialed an executive coordinator role. So one of the challenges that the board has always had, of course, is that as a purely volunteer organization, we're all putting in our time after work, around work, at lunch hours. I always had the board calls for everybody on Mondays at lunchtime, which was, thank you very much for giving up your lunch hours. So what we tried doing was bringing an executive coordinator, which for 3 months we were very fortunate to have Michael Vermeulen join us in that role. And then, you know, lead game designer at Aurora 44, that's kind of the thing you don't say no to. So Michael's currently doing that. And that was a huge help. Michael was able to take all of our, a lot of our communication overhead and that sort of thing, get that stuff really well organized, and a lot of the relationship management that we have going on that does just take a lot of time. So being able to even put a few days a week into that, come on in, was a huge help to us. Obviously, one of the reasons that that was a trial was that we've got limited resources. We don't collect membership fees. We have very limited income. Lance will talk about that in a few minutes. But we couldn't maintain that role. We don't have the funds right now to keep someone on staff full time. So one of the things that we need to figure out how we're going to do going forward as an organization is get some more funds in the door. Because obviously, I think what we saw very quickly in that 3 months was we can accelerate our activities quite a bit when there's just one person dedicated, even one person dedicated to that. We started a studio manager's Slack channel. So there's the NZ Game Dev Slack. We invited the studio managers to join a private Slack channel there. That's, you know, don't want to have an exclusive club or anything, but it's a way for those managers to share the challenges that they're facing running their studios with each other. Lots of discussion about tax, go figure, and employment law and that sort of thing. So that's been very helpful, I think, for the folks involved. We did a bunch of investigation to new membership systems and model and thing, but there's still lots left to do on that front. That'll be something I think the new board will be diving into. So the other areas that we worked on this year, I just want to touch on collaboration. So we started reaching out to other organizations. The NZGDA, I think, has always worked with other organizations, but we formalized a couple of those relationships this year. We Create is one that predates, of course, this year, and that's one that Stephen Knightley is very involved in. He's on the advisory board there and has kept us very much in the loop with their work. And We Create is the umbrella organization for the creative industries in New Zealand. And they're doing a lot of really good work. And one of the things that we were able to be involved in was we went to the Creative Economy Conversation, which was a full day of conversations and workshops between all the different creative sectors that are involved, everything from design and publishing to film, radio, and of course, us from games. Stephen, Mario, and myself went and we invited Dean Hall along to sort of give everybody a bit of an overview of what's possible in this space. And he was the second speaker, I think, and one of only 3 or 4 speakers who addressed the entire audience, because most of it was breakout sessions. And it was pretty evident pretty quickly how little most people understand in the rest of the creative sector about the game industry, about how big it is worldwide and what's possible. So Dean kind of blew a few minds and put a few challenges in front of them, which was wonderful. And that whole conversation also involved a lot of government folks. So we had representation from MBIE, NZTE, MFAT, who am I missing? MCH, Ministry of Culture and Heritage. There's a handful of government folks there, not more than a handful, I should say. There's quite a few involved in those conversations, which was great. And many ministers came throughout the day to sort of address the whole group. So that was a very productive set of conversations. And out of that, We Create's working on what they call a Creative Economies Manifesto, which strongly represents games as one of the future areas of growth for New Zealand. New this year was an alliance that we formed with NZ Tech. NZ Tech is sort of the technology counterpart to We Create. So they're the large umbrella organization for technology in New Zealand, and represent of the various member groups, about 22 or 23 of them that are allied with NZ Tech. It represents about 24,000 employees across New Zealand. And they've done a lot of really good work, again, with informing government about what's possible. They help groups like the FinTech group, for example, and the blockchain group get spun up. And they're very excited to have us involved in lots of their conversations. We coordinated the meetups for Tech Week in May. So we got all the meetups across New Zealand lined up in that 1 week, which was great. Thank you so much, everybody who was involved in that. It was slightly chaotic, but I think it came together, and it meant that there was, if you were interested in games in New Zealand, in most major centers, there was something to go, and I think most of the meetups scheduled content that was really about, it was sort of introductory content. It was, if you walked in off the street and knew nothing about games, you weren't going to get dumped into like a high-level AI talk by a really talented programmer from Grinding Gear or something. It was like, here's something that's exciting and interesting. Hope you can vote. The other thing that kind of came out this year was we contributed to and signed on to their 2017 manifesto, which was intended to give all of the various parties in the lead up to the election a bunch of information about the technology sector, and we had several things to say on that front, and they incorporated all of that feedback and added it, which was great. On further collaboration stuff, so on Facebook, and thank you everybody who was patient with me as I'm still confused about the difference between Facebook groups and Facebook pages. I just, still worst, but it all worked out. And in the end, so the International Game Developers Association New Zealand chapter had a Facebook group, and NZGDA had a Facebook group, and there was the NZ Game Dev Facebook group. And what we did was unify the NZGDA one, the IGDA NZ one, in order to put all of those conversations under one roof. That's been very successful. There's almost 1,200 people involved in those conversations now, and every day there's, I think, kind of quite high-value conversations there. And then New Zealand Film Commission, as I mentioned earlier, they did their pilot interactive development fund this year. We spent quite a bit of time helping them with the language in that in particular, because of course the language they were using was primarily from film, and games are different. So we gave them what feedback we could there. We invited them to QE Game Starter last year, so they were able to see the process of pitching a game, see what teams did. And we wrote a fairly extensive pitching tips article for members on NZGDA.com. And the conversations are just ongoing with NZ Film, and we're very happy to have them as a sponsor this year for QE Game Starter. So hopefully, actually, I think on Friday, a couple of them will be joining us for the conference, and there's some new folks as well. So I look forward to them sort of, again, getting to see the scope of what's possible in games, because the fellow who came up last year came away from the conference really buzzing. He was very excited about what he'd seen and what he'd learned. On the community side, we stay, of course, actively involved in all kinds of community stuff. This year, we're super proud to sponsor Play by Play. It's the second annual. They're coming back April 16th to 21st, 2018. Play by Play, if you haven't been to it, is in Wellington. It's a games festival, so there's a whole series of games from New Zealand and Australia, which are put up on display at Thistle Hall. Is it still Thistle Hall next year? Might not be. Maybe a new venue, maybe a bigger venue, because it keeps growing. It was huge this year, and it was a very efficient use of space for all those games. It was really wonderful, along with a great conference on the Saturday and the awards show on the Saturday night. So we were very, very pleased to be able to sponsor that. And on the sort of the more consumer-facing side, Armageddon is the big traveling entertainment expo, and we've set up booth space there. We had 5 games in Christchurch. There were 8 games in Wellington. Auckland's coming up, so if you've got a game that you want to show to the public, there will be space in Auckland. Neve Fitzgerald, who's also our NZGDC coordinator, who is out coordinating NZGDC right now, has done a wonderful job making sure that those happen. And everybody who's participated has said it was the most intensive playtesting that they've ever had, which is great. The Arcade Auckland had a pretty successful year, and I think Joe can probably speak to that a little bit when he does the secretary's report, actually. But they're going to be moving to a new home sometime in the next month or two. But they sort of continually grew that community here in Auckland with several indie developers working out there, and some of whom have sort of grown up, I guess, and outgrown the space a little bit, and others who have just found a lot of ongoing support there. And I have to give a special shout out to Amy Harmon, who's a programmer at RocketWorks, Amy jumped on the chance to be our social media volunteer, and if you're a Twitter person, you might have seen a bit of a shift in our Twitter. Amy is a master of GIFs and has just continuously provided a really warm, wonderful presence for the NZGDA on Twitter, and I am just constantly impressed by the amount of information that she is able to surface to us as a board as well, because she sort of continually comes back to us with, did you know about this thing? I think Starship Theory, we first heard about it from Amy. So so thank you very much, Amy. She'll be here tomorrow. Let's give her a high five then. And lastly, just a couple of outreach things. The New Zealand Transport Agency, or New Zealand Transport Authority, I should say, runs a competition, a game design competition for students in years 1 to 13. So I think they do like 3 bands it was. And they asked if I would be a judge for that, which was great. I got to do that with Ben. Where's Ben? Ben's also out coordinating NZGDC. So Ben and I were participating in that along with Bron Stuckey, who's a really wonderful games educator, researcher, and trainer and tutor. And so we were involved in that, which was a lot of fun. And related that, Ben and I were both participants in the Games for Learning conference, which had its first one at Te Papa just last Thursday, Friday, and that was fantastic. I was really excited to be there. Kind of came into it a little bit crazy because everything was going on and lots was happening, and I'm like, 2 days, and then I came in and the end result was phenomenal. They did a great job with the conference. There are so many educators out there who are so excited and passionate about being able to use games in the classroom, and not just games that students play to learn things, but making games. And that was a message that I think came through loud and clear. So lots of cool stuff happened there, including there was a group of students, year 13 students from Rarotonga and the Cook Islands came over. So there's 8 of them, and their 2 teachers came over, and they had been using Game Fruit in the classroom to build games as part of their media studies program. And they gave a fantastic presentation about that, and we were very pleased to be able to host them at a workshop as well and kind of show them around. So they went home with giant grins on their faces and plans to take over the world by making video games. I think a few of them are looking to come and study at Victoria and Massey and possibly AUT next year, so it's great. So here brings us to today and tomorrow and Friday. So we're very pleased to be hosting the New Zealand Game Developers Conference again. And so this year is going to be even bigger, I think, than last year, which was quite substantial. So very excited for that. Today's workshops have already been wonderful. There was I was fortunate to participate in Jen McLean from the IGDA Foundation and executive director now of the IGDA as well. Congratulations, Jen. Participate in Jen's workshop on leadership this morning, which was phenomenal. And I think if all the art and technical workshops were half as good as that, we're in very good hands. And Kiwi Game Starter is just wrapping up, and we'll be announcing the winners of that tomorrow morning. And I want to give a shout out to Blake Wood for just the fantastic design on the new logos for NZGDC and for Kiwi Game Starter. It's nice to have a good new coat of paint for 2017 for these. So that's my bit. I'd like to hand things over to Joe Chang, give the Secretary's report.
Thank you. Unexpected applause, always very nice. So I'm the secretary for the previous cycle, and I also manage the Arcade Auckland, as James mentioned. So for those of you who don't know, the Arcade Auckland is a shared indie developer space that AT was very generous in sponsoring for the last year and a half or so. So we basically put that together because a lot of developers were saying, hey, look, we want a space that we can all collaborate and work in. So it worked out really, really well. The demand was there. And we've seen over the last year and a half, it's been going really, really great. So at the height of things, we've had about 15 to 20 people come in. So that's been really, really good. More recently, we've had some more bittersweet victories, I guess. So one of the core teams ended up going to a much more prestigious shared space out in the Wynyard Quarter, which is a new area. And some other guys have left as well. It's like they've graduated from the Arcade Auckland. So that's been going really, really well. And the current premises we'll be moving away from, but hopefully we'll be spooling up again pretty quickly. So that's the arcade. In terms of the finances, basically prior to probably the last couple of years, we've been, I guess, freeballing most things. We've been doing the accounts ourselves, and it's been pretty much appropriate due to the size of the organization. But as you can see, with the growth of the industry, the growth of the association, membership, and all that kind of stuff, it's a little bit more complicated now. So NZGDC is a whole entity, like a whole business in itself. Kiwi GameStarter and all these other things are whole things in themselves. So we sat down and talked about it. So first of all, we implemented Xero, which is really great, helped us out. And then the other thing that we did was we decided to engage an expert, and that expert is Lance. And Lance is a chartered accountant. He's got a lot of great experience. He's the current acting CFO for PicPoc, is that right? Sort of, yeah. So he's very experienced in terms of finance and accounting. So he's made my life way easier as well. And he's making it easier for me tonight too, because he'll be presenting the actual details of the finances. So I'd like to invite up Lance. So please give him a hand.
Oh, sorry, I'll just move that over for you so it's on the right screen. There you go.
Good evening.
There you go.
Right, I'll go over these in the with the short version, unless there are any questions. I'm happy to take any as we're going through. So we'll go through all the standard disclosures, etc. Go past those. We get to the more interesting part of the financial statements, which is the profit and loss. We've gone through and we've done quite a bit of work in recategorizing a lot of the income and expenditure, and I'll come to why we've done that in a moment. So to summarize, we've got a total revenue of 97,000 and expenses of 83 in the last year. And I'll go down. So we've got a surplus of 14,650. Now, I'll further talk about the profit and loss further down. We've got society equity of 58,000, and that represents the reserves of the society going forward, especially for the likes of funding initiatives and also the conference that we're in now. We do need a good backstop there just in case anything went wrong. It's certainly conservative and prudent to keep those revenues and reserves in place. Balance sheet of the association, we're showing that these equity is represented by a good amount of cash in the bank. And probably, yeah, I'll move on from that. Back to standard financial disclosures again. I've got hard copies of these if anyone wants a copy to talk about. Now, where we did a lot of work was breaking down the revenues and expenditure into the different segments that the association works in, conference naturally being the biggest one. So this gives better information than the profit and loss. We've got a general fund which covers the things which haven't been tagged into various activities, and we come to the likes of Kiwi GameStarter, which is fully funded with sponsorship, which matches the prize money paid out. Local meetups, we've got a good amount of sponsorship there. And the arcade Joe mentioned, that's the breakdown for that. So 39,000 of income, 28 of expenses in that year. Now, I mentioned the profit before, $14,000 for this current year. There's a number of adjustments to be made, and where we've done a lot of work is recategorizing the income and expenditure so that we can work out what is not actually taxable. As a general rule, revenue from members is exempt from tax, and we've done quite a bit of work in working out where we can leave profit out from paying tax, and the conference is the main area. So with that $14,000 of income, we've actually got only tax payable of $243, which I think is a good result. We've gone back to 2013 in this process, and we've identified that we've overpaid tax by some $16,000, which we're going to get back from them in revenue over the course of the next few months. So it's been quite a big process, but we've got there now. We've got systems and processes set up for the future, and we'll get some more money back into our hands, which we can use on industry events. So, any questions? All right, thank you.
Well done. Just get back over to. Cool. So, brings us to sort of the final piece of business for this meeting, which is election of new committee members. So, the board, and just before we go into the folks who have stood and the positions that they're standing for, I'd like to thank very much 4 folks who are on the board who won't be continuing into the next year. Mario Winans, who's been part of the board and part of the New Zealand game industry as long as there's been both of those things, I think, who's been both a voice of reason and experience and a huge supporter of the industry, quietly from the background and often from the foreground, particularly internationally, for a long time. So thank you very much, Mario, for all of your help and support there. Ben Kenobi, who's out doing the thing that he's done for the last few years, which is make NZGDC run. And this year, he handed most of those reins over to Neve Fitzgerald, another one of our board members. But Ben's work on the conference has got it to this point today. And his work with the association has been exemplary as well. Andrew Stairs, who will be joining us tomorrow, I believe. He spent this year with us on the board and was quite active in the Wellington community. And Tara Brannigan, we were very fortunate to have for the first few months of this last year before she was stolen away from us and is off in Germany now as the Director of Community Management, I believe it is, at Flair Games. But before she left, Tara gave us a bunch of advice around committees, the structure of committees for events like NZGDC, and also set up for social media and spent some time with Amy as she came on board with Twitter. So we're very thankful for Tara's work there at the beginning of the year. So the 2017-2018 board, very pleased to have all of these folks standing. And as we have 9 board positions and we have 9 people standing, we chose this year not to do the online election process as we normally would. We save on the expense and the overhead of that, and instead just decided to do it at the AGM. Michael Vermeulen, who's been with the board for a year now and was the executive coordinator for 3 months there, is standing as chair. So thank you very much for that, Mike. Lisa Blakey from Runaway, who Lisa's, well, she'll be here tomorrow. She's flying in tonight. Marvelous. Then I'm going to drop straight down to Zoe Hobson, who is here today. Thank you so much, Zoe, for standing as well. We're very fortunate to have you. And thank you as well for your work with Kiwi Game Starter. Joe Chang has got a little bit of overhead with his new business, so he won't be continuing as secretary, but he will be continuing on the board. Stephen Knightley, who, like Mario, I think has been part of the association almost as long as it's been a thing. We're very fortunate to have him staying with us. He knows where all the pieces are and who all the people are. Brian Cole will be joining us tomorrow. He's working out of Hamilton. So this year we're very fortunate to have 2 folks from Dunedin and 1 person from Hamilton. So we're beginning again to spread out the NZGDA's reach across the country and make sure that we've got more accurate representation geographically, which is fantastic. Andrew Lamb is staying with the board this year. Thank you very much, Andrew. Andrew's based out of Wellington with the Camshaft software team. Neve Fitzgerald. Neve has been a tireless force this year, running the Armageddon Expo, chairing the NZ, wasn't me, chairing the NZGDC committee, and a million other little things besides. And Neve is founder, I guess, is her official title, at Suntail Games, and is currently wrapping up her studies at MDS. So how she sleeps, I'm not sure, when and where and how, but she's been doing a lot. And new to the board this year as well, Shrek, there you are, awesome. Very excited to have you. Shrek's based here in Auckland, working on games, and brings quite a bit of experience from the IT sector as well previous to that. So, in the interest of putting everything on the record and keeping it formal, with these folks here standing for the board, all in favor of the board for 2017, 2018, please just raise your hand and say aye. Marvelous, thank you very much. Welcome to the 2017-2018 board. And I guess the person that I left. So it has been my great pleasure and great honor to be chairperson this past year, and to serve on the board for the year previous to that. Unfortunately, just with the way things are ramping up now with Weta Workshop and Magic Leap, and sort of the requirements on my folks there and some of the new responsibilities I've taken on with that organization, I don't have the time to give to the NZGDA that it deserves. So I'm very fortunate and very happy to say that I know that these people are going to do an amazing job this year. So thank you all so much. And thank you for the support this year. There have been lots and lots of small things and big things that everyone has done to make the work that we do possible and to make it better. So thank you all for that. No standing ovations when it's a thing. So with that, if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to address them as we can. And otherwise, we are done the annual general meeting of the New Zealand Game Developers Association for 2017. Questions, comments, queries, or quirks, all are welcome. And none are needed. So at that point, we'll wrap it up. Thank you all very much. And if all went well, theoretically, this has been recorded and will be available on YouTube later for folks who weren't able to join us. Thank you very much.